Hey everyone, welcome to the Worship Artistry podcast. My name is Jason Houtsma, and with me
is Christina Kislanka.
Hello, Christina.
Hello, Jason. How are you?
I'm very tired.
Why are you tired?
I am incredibly tired. A friend of ours passed away, and so we had a memorial service yesterday, and then as all good memorials do, it broke out into a party, and I was taking and one of the daughters threw a guitar in my hand around a fire pit and was like, "Time to sing," and like everybody was gathered around, and we were singing out we weren't singing worship songs. It's like, Mr. Jones, but it was this amazing thing. But we were like, you're looking around, you're seeing everybody, this whole community that's there, and it's like you have this deep grief, but then you also have this really deep joy, and it's this bizarre. Like, have you ever had someone close to you die? It's this really bizarre thing. And you're also connecting with all these other people who, for us, in our group of friends have lost people recently. And so it's kind of bringing up all this stuff, and you just realize how connected you are. It's super beautiful. But I took requests till 1 a.m.
What were some of the song highlights?
Oh, let's see. Mr. Jones is pretty good. We started with some Beach Boys. So we did some Barbara Ann and Sloop John B. What's kind of interesting is you're singing all these songs that are just, fun to sing and everything. And then different lyrics are hitting a little differently because, you've just gone through this whole memorial thing and been grieving and everything. And it was beautiful. We had one of the girls that brought out her flute. There's a flute. Somebody
I love that she casually had a flute.
We were at her house.
Oh,
so it wasn't like in her sleeve or anything.
I was like, well, that's kind of a random thing to carry, but to each their own.
It was so fun and so celebratory and life-giving, and somebody else had a tambourine, so there was some tambourine and some dancing, and
love that.
Yeah, it's a great way to grieve.
That's amazing.
We have this amazing hope, so it was really cool to be a part of that.
That's beautiful. It's always interesting to sing songs, especially in worship. Yes, you were talking about lyrics for not necessarily worship songs, but if you're leading songs for years, or maybe a song you're doing more often than not, I think it's easy to get into that just business as usual almost of, well, this is just that song. I take it as an opportunity to challenge myself to not question, but actually sing every word as if it's for the first time.
Yeah.
And especially when I'm leading a song, that I always encourage my team of, when you're singing the song, actually sing every word as though it matters.
Yeah.
Ponder every single word that you're saying, because that changes the way that you're leading. That changes the way that the song is even received in the congregation and the way that people begin to worship. The words, they were written and they have power, and it's an opportunity for us to almost receive a new revelation through the song whenever we sing it.
Yeah, I think Tiffany, who's the Elevation?
Tiffany Hudson,
we had her on, and I remember her talking about how long it takes her to actually get to a point where she really owns the words in a song. A lot of times we kind of gloss over things like, hey, we just got to get this one out the door, let's get it done.
Yeah.
And but it is amazing how different it is when you, Chris talks about it, he calls it singing your testimony. This idea that you're singing your testimony and what that means, and so really trying to dig into that, and it's amazing. You can hear and feel the difference, and it's it is amazing to be led by people like that. It was cool at this memorial service. It's kind of more of a high church kind of a deal, but they had but I got to do a song on it. My guitar wasn't on, which was kind of funny. Fortunately, I was with somebody whose guitar was on, so it all worked out okay. Yes. But yeah, we got to sing some worship songs, and the cool thing is in these old buildings, everyone starts singing. I was like, "Be thou," and then I just backed away from the microphone.
Yeah, and everyone just carried it.
Everybody takes over. It's so cool and really powerful in those moments. So yeah, it was great.
It's amazing.
Well, we actually have a pretty powerful guest today. We have Blake Wiggins from Housefires, and it's funny because a lot of times, I always need to be reminded of this. Sometimes you're in the mood to do an interview, and sometimes you're not. And sometimes you're more excited about some interviews than other ones. And
honesty on the podcast today.
And generally, what I have found is if I'm not excited about it, then that's going to be a really good one. And this one, the reason why this one I was kind of, it was a different like publicist than we normally work with, and so there was just that kind of. I was excited to talk to somebody from Housefires, but but it was really cool because he gives such, I talk about honesty. Like he just gives these really honest answers to questions that I've always wondered about. So we talk about things like, what is it when you're working with all these other musicians, and like how do you not compete, and how do you do you recreating the feeling of worship, idea of like, oh, you go and when you tour these songs, now you're playing them all the time, like do you feel like you're faking it? So like those kind of questions, and he just had great answers and just really amazing. And so so enjoy this Blake Wiggins interview. Well, Blake Wiggins, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks so much, man. Happy to be here.
So you are a member of Housefires, right? That's
yes.
kind of, you do a number of things, but you're a member of Housefires, and that's kind of what brought us together here. Yeah. What does that mean?
That's a good question. So, Housefires has been around for about the last 10 years, and started really out of some house churches in Atlanta at a church called Grace Midtown, which Kirby Capel, who's in Housefires, and I are still a part of that church. We both work there, lead worship there. But back like 10 years ago, like 2013 was when this whole thing of Housefires started, and it really started in these house churches, these communities where people were, gathering together, praying together, singing songs. And that kind of was the genesis of what we know Housefires is now as like an artist and a collective. And so obviously over time, some faces have changed and kind of our expression has changed a bit. And in the last year, we kind of gathered back together in last January and March to work on this new record and just come together. And with that came like a lot of collaboration and some new songs. And so a few of us hopped in for the record, and then that turned into us kind of joining the collective in a more permanent sense. So for me and Ryan Ellis, we're now like a part of the squad, I guess. And then obviously there are tons of other people who are featured on the record. And so it's kind of like this like extended universe now we have the kind of core of the collective. But then obviously, and you'll even see like on the record that we put out back in January, just how many people are featured on this thing and how many people are now a part. And so it's kind of an amorphous question. It's like, what does it mean to be a part of Housefires? It's a really great question, but it means that we're like a part of the collaborations together in terms of writing, in terms of gathering together and worshiping and capturing these moments and kind of putting them out for the world to be able to make it their own. And so, we do all sorts of stuff. Like when we're traveling, we're all part of it. When we're on moments like this, we're kind of like representing the collective of Housefires. Very cool. Yeah. So you're saying that like you were there 10 years ago, right? So when No, I was not. Okay. So actually that's what's crazy is I was a part of so Nate Moore, who is like a part of OG Housefires, he was a worship pastor at kind of like
Do they get their own crew badges like OG Housefires?
Yeah, they really should actually. There should be like a distinction, honestly. He was the worship pastor at like a family church of Grace Midtown called Grace Athens, which is like an hour away. I was actually like a member at that church. So I've been like in the mix with these guys, but not at all really a part of this until about a year ago. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So what is that? Okay. So tell me, so like you had said, like Housefires has changed a lot over time, right? Like,
totally.
What, and you were, but you were a member at that church. You kind of saw some of the stuff that was going on, right? Is what you're saying. So like, so what has that change been like? I think a lot of times we try to, when something catches, we try and grab it, right? And like ride it. And, sometimes we try to control it. Sometimes we go in all these different directions, like, what has it been like to watch it change over time?
Totally. I mean, when they recorded those first couple of albums, they like had no idea what those would become. It was literally as simple as we've been singing these songs. I mean, when you're talking like songs like Come to the River and Good Father. I mean, like these like OG Housefire songs. Um, those were songs that they just sang in their house churches, and they kind of wanted to resource the rest of the house churches within Grace Midtown as like, hey, here are songs that y'all can sing. So they put it on like Noise Trade, and it blew up. And so then all of a sudden it becomes this other thing, right? Where they're, the idea of like we're making a record starts. And so you start seeing that with like House Fires 2 and House Fires 3. And at that point, House Fires is really creating songs that like all these churches are singing and are becoming like, songs that the whole world knows. And so about 2-3 years ago, um, it right before the pandemic, it became like a real uh, kind of a reinvention of what House Fires is, with like grabbing what Kirby and Nate have been doing for 10 plus years, and bringing people like me and Ryan in, who have been friends with these people and collaborating with them, but not really a part of it. But just basically like we've been doing the same things. We've been like leading in house churches. We've been like parts of our local churches and just writing songs for the church in our communities. So that's kind of what that was. It kind of evolved into, let's bring people who are already doing the same thing we're already in a relationship with, and then see what kind of comes of it now. So that's kind of the version of House Fires you're seeing now, is this thing that it used to be like a really it was like a small close-knit group of people that did the whole thing for like 10 years. And now with this kind of new version, it's like, hey, we're already doing all this together. Let's just bring you guys in to see what happens now.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure. So you're kind of like trying to document what's
Absolutely.
like, is there something different between trying to document something that's already going on versus
Yeah.
trying to like write for something that you hope will go on?
Absolutely. And that you kind of, that really is what, I mean, this record and the records that are coming are kind of that. And it's always been that way. Like House Fires before now and House Fires now has captured moments where people are just getting together to worship, and you just kind of press record and see what happens. And like we got a set list, but it could really go anywhere. It's like really common for us, like we'll, have like 10 songs on a set list. We might get through 6, right? We might get the whole thing. And so it's just, we're just going to kind of let it unfold and see. Herbie always uses this term like the song after the song. So it's like you'll record the song, but really where we've kind of found our niche is the song after the song. Like when we're all worshiping together, like what happens then, as opposed to just these like beautifully like crafted songs. What happens when you kind of just let it go? So I think there is a big difference in going in and like, this is what we're going to do. We've got these like really ironed out arrangements. We're just going to go from like beginning to end and cut it. And instead, this really is like, I think you described it really well, as we're kind of coming together and capturing the moment, which I think is what has always made like these kind of worship things distinct. This is the music that like I've worshiped to just in my own life for all these years. And so to be a part of it now is obviously, I'm very grateful for that, because there's a big distinction when you are really just gathering with people and kind of seeing what happens. There's just like really, it's nerve-wracking, it's kind of scary, but the really beautiful stuff comes out of it. So it's really sick. I mean, when you listen to this record, it's like something like 12, 13 songs long, and maybe like 7 of those songs are like actual songs. The rest are flows that came out of it. That's
it helps when you have such beautiful voice. I was gonna say, it helps when you have such like beautiful voices and talented people, and does that what does so like I told you, like we're oftentimes talking to worship musicians, right? And all across the spectrum, it's like everything from like, we practice like crazy, but then we're on a track and it's start to finish, and this is the start and end, and if I mess up, like I feel bad about it, and like the pastor gives me a weird look, right? All the way through to like, I don't know, like I just grabbed my guitar and started singing some songs,
Yeah.
when you're kind of going through like what level of knowing one
Yeah.
another and what level of musicianship do you guys need to have in place to have the freedom
Yeah.
to step back? Does that even like play into your mind at all? Or are you just kind of like, oh, we just go for it and then we just kind of cut right here when that guy
No,
went
I mean,
sideways?
yeah. I mean, that's a huge piece of it. There's um the like the band component of that is so huge. We have some like amazing instrumentalists who run with us who are like the masters of these live moments, in the sense of like they're so responsive and they're so prepared. Um, when you're talking about people like Sam Simon who plays keys, or Sam Rady who plays bass, or HB who plays drums, these are people who are so good at responding to worship leaders and really creating like a kind of a canvas uh, for us to just kind of go, and also like a real safety net for us to land in, so that we don't have to just carry it. I think that's the thing with, especially when you start getting into more like spontaneous moments. If it's just you can do some things, right? Uh, but you can't really go for it until you have people around you who can really support you and work together. So I mean, there's so much like looking each other in the eyes and like seeing like you have to be responsive to one another to allow for moments to kind of unfold like that. So I think we're probably somewhere like halfway in between. Um, there's tons of preparation of like, so if we use that imagery of like the song after the song itself, we're really prepared for, you know,
Mm-hmm.
and not extremely prepared. I do want to be kind of straightforward on that. Like um, we're not running tracks during our live stuff. We have a click track and that's it. Everything
Mm-hmm.
else is getting caught live. Obviously, things are getting like captured afterwards to like kind of clean up your bum notes and your
Sure.
whatever. Um, that is like obviously a huge piece of it. But there's like real preparation happening for the arrangement of the songs themselves. So usually, to kind of give you like a peek behind the curtain of how we do things, this record specifically was caught in the middle of some writing camps that we were doing with Tribal and Maverick City. And so in the morning and at night of these writing camps, we would have like just a worship moment that was a house fires thing. And so we'd gather in the morning, we'd worship. I mean, you have some songs like on this record, there's a song called Grateful. That was like the very first song we played that morning. And you can like see it. You can like see the sunlight coming in and you like see everything. So with that, and then at
Like
night,
my video right now where I have to keep moving
100%
over to
mine
get
too.
out
I'm
of the
like trying
sun.
to get a little more into light. I'm like
I'm
in
like,
this dark hotel room.
I live in
Um,
Washington, man. We're not used to this.
oh, right. Gosh, dude. I can't imagine. Well, here I live in Atlanta, but I'm in Nashville right now, and the pollen is so insane that I like can't walk outside right now. So I'm like, literally like hold up my hotel. But so yeah, like we would come together and we have like real rehearsals before these nights where we're like ironing out the arrangements. But it's really just to get a feel so that we all feel comfortable with the song. Like, um, like instrumental parts are like more so happening during the song, and so you can feel that. There's we we're not like super heavy on instrumental parts. We're not super heavy on like lead lines, but we do have a lot of preparation from our guys who are kind of functioning as like music directors when we're making these records. And then at that point, we have a pretty loose set list, and it's like we're going to start here and we're just going to flow on it until it feels like we're done. And we're not gonna cut it off before it's over, but we're also not just gonna drag it out, because we do. We want to hear these songs. We actually want to like all these songs mean something to us. They've all kind of come out of community, and so these are songs that we feel like we resonate with. And so let's get through them. So that's kind of how our preparation goes in terms of the night of, and then from like a post production standpoint, that's when producers get involved to kind of take from the raw version of that and make kind of the most the most concise and compelling version of that song. So like for a song that might be like 15 minutes long live, it might get cut down to like 8 or 9 minutes. And at that point, we're trusting the producers to really find the right moments and to make it actually flow. So,
well, as a company that does tutorials, I have to tell you, when I see 15 minutes, I'm like, I'm out.
I know, dude.
I can't even do it.
Do it.
But I actually really appreciate what you're saying about the whole, like, there's the song and then there's the song after the song. You know, from a tutorial standpoint, we focus on the song. And then we'll usually kind of say, and that because there's no point in me trying to like teach you this thing that somebody came up with spontaneously that was an expression of their heart, and then going, well, let's just turn that into math, right? Like it's totally. Like we're really trying to say, like, here's kind of that that
well, and I think that
piece.
that's actually a really cool thing as well, is like, again, the songs can be duplicated really easily, and it's like up to the worship leaders in their local churches to actually find their like song after the song, for lack of a better term. And that's what I think is really cool about, you know, the access that we have to like all these expressions from all these people around the world that are writing songs for the church. And then we can actually see how they apply to our like local expression is always like, for me as a church worship leader, that is exciting to me. And so I appreciate like, let's learn the actual song, and then everything else, like, let's see what happens when it's our church and our team, and we can find our own way of doing that. And I think that's really cool. I think there is sometimes a lot of pressure to maybe recapture those moments that like people love from the live recordings. And it's like, that was for that place and time. Like, and it was awesome then. And now let's find what it means for us, which I think is really cool.
Yeah. How do you balance that? Because like, you know, it's funny. Like, I think, you know, even when I'm playing or I'm leading worship or whatever, sometimes I'm like, oh yeah, I just kind of came up with that on the spot. And then I'm like, oh, it turns out I do that like every freaking time. But it feels like it feels like I came up with it on the spot that time, you know? You know, when you take these kind of intimate things and then you go and lead others, and you like you said, there's like some pressure to like reproduce, like, how do you keep, for lack of a better term, authentic? Like, how do you stay in that moment of like, I'm not performing, like, or do you just go like, hey, we're just performing this song and like, that's what this is? Because the church is always so like, has such a problem with the word performance, you know, and it's like, well, I'm still performing the song. Like I'm playing, like how do you stay authentic within that? And how do you carry that over into your live experiences?
Totally. I mean, it's a really hard question, to be honest. Well, it's not a hard question. It's just layered. Like, I think there's a practical element to it, but more importantly, I think there's a heart aspect to it, which is, I think oftentimes as worship leaders or worship musicians that we, whether we want to admit it or not, we want to create these moments that feel special and significant. And what really is much more meaningful is when we're like responding to what God is doing. Sometimes, you know what, that's going to be me playing that same line that I play at the end of every song. It's going to be this, I'm going to go into that same flow that like still resonates with me when I sing this song. Or just because that's where like the way that God is moving in this moment is like compelling me to move in this way. But it takes, I think, it takes kind of like a resolution to stay focused on what God is doing, rather than like, all right, here we go. We could really take this up. We could, you know what I'm saying? Like, there's always like, if we're honest, we have those moments where we want to be like, all right, if I do this thing, I know that everyone's going to get into it. Is that really what God's doing though in the moment? And I think that's a hard thing as a worship leader. It's a hard thing as a worship musician, to be sensitive and to remind yourself to stay sensitive to what it is that God is doing in a moment, in a room, in people, in yourself, in the song, etc. Especially when you already kind of have this carved out path that you could go. You're like, all right, I know that when I'm singing this song, I could go here, and it's like, I know it's gonna work, quote unquote.
It's gonna work. The hands are gonna go up.
Totally. And it's like, if we're honest, we know what that is, and yet there's something much more meaningful that happens when we slow down to respond. And so I think that from a from a personal like heart standpoint, that's probably my answer to your question. From a practical standpoint, it's just to stay fresh. I feel like I found that I lead more freely and more responsively when I've like internalized these songs before I'm leading. And sometimes that's hard when you're playing songs that you've played a bunch of times. Like, as a worship artist, as a worship leader, there are songs that you've sung as many times you can count. And so, again, your path to go into. And instead to be like, all right, what does that song mean to me now? You take a song like Build My Life, and it's like, Kirby's probably sung Build My Life 8 gajillion times in her life.
Right.
But I've had the front row seat to see her like as a worship pastor and worship leader, to respond to that song in new ways 8-9 years after they wrote that song, and so if a song is really kind of God breathed, then it will continue to be compelling for people. And so I think it's up to us to kind of find as worship leaders how it's moving us now instead of how it moved back then. And I also think back to like years ago, I think I heard Jonathan Helser say this thing that maybe he heard from someone else. I don't know. I'm like 4 degrees removed from the statement, but it was something on the lines of like I don't want to hear what they sang. Like, I don't need to hear their song, like, because you have a song and God wants to hear your song. I think that's really important, is like not getting into this kind of karaoke, copycat, paint by numbers version of it. It's like, we know that it works, but it's so much better when it's someone's real heart poured out to God in a worship set. So I think that those are some practical and probably hard elements to that I find myself trying to stay fresh and connected and not just regurgitating the same things that I know work, because formulas, they play off well, but they don't move me. They don't, and they may not move the heart of God. And ultimately that's what this whole thing is about,
Yeah, well, it's funny because it's like, if you go into any worship leading Facebook group or whatever, right? And it's always like, all these songs sound the same. I'm so bored, blah, blah, blah. And my question is always like, okay, well, what are you bringing to that song? Like, what do you actually, like, we can all sit there and throw rocks at stuff and go, like, oh, I don't like this. And I just wish that, I wish every guitar line wasn't this. And it's like, well, take the delay off your guitar, bro. I don't know what to tell you. Like, make it interesting for you, but we just desire that so much, I think, as musicians and creativity. And this, for you guys, when you're, you guys have, like you said, you have that very live sound. Does it create a different level? I think everybody feels this. I'm curious, as you, as a professional who does this, when you hit record, are you like, ugh? like I swear, I'm like, how many times I nail it every other time, and then if you press that button, I'm like, it's gonna take me 3 starts again. Like what kind of pressure does that put on when you're taking these songs that you've known forever, and you're like, no, but don't worry, but now we're gonna record them.
Oh yeah, I mean, it's just as nerve-wracking as you'd imagine. It's like, I mean, maybe there are people who walk into these things feeling like, yeah, let's do it, but everyone that I know, we all have the same experience, which is, man, I've sung this song a million times. I wrote this song and I can't remember, I can't remember the words or how it starts, whatever.
Well, that's because you're remembering. I always tell people I forget all my own songs because I'm thinking of like version 7. Oh, exactly. But now we're on version 13. So like,
and 2 hours ago, we changed the arrangement and we're playing it in a different key, and it's a duet, and also, it's like all that stuff. And so, I mean, that's real. It's really nerve-wracking. But post-production is really helpful. I think that's like one of the best kept secrets, to be honest, of live worship music, is like, no one's doing this perfectly, and we give ourselves the flexibility and kind of the cushion of knowing like, hey, there are parts of this, like, if you kind of butcher that vocal line, it's okay. Like, tomorrow we can like just take that one part and re-record that one part so that it doesn't go out just sounding like trash, you know, because you want these songs, they have to feel real, because otherwise, why are we doing this? But also you want people to be able to sing along, and you want people to be able to understand what's happening in the song. And so if I put out, you know, a vocal track that just sounds terrible, it's like, sure, that was authentic, but no one sing along, right? And
It was
so it's like,
authentically
great job.
bad.
Yeah, it's like, great job. You put out an authentic, terrible song, you know? And so I think that's a real helpful thing, is to know that you do have the cushion built in. Also, like, you can, in live recordings and other things, really common, especially in our world, is like, we'll get halfway through a song, or we'll finish a song and be like, hey, we need to redo the beginning of that song. And we'll just do that. I mean, there's a song on the record called If I Could Have Anything that we literally recorded the whole song, and then we redid the beginning of it 2 more times, and just to make sure that we got it right. And when you listen to the track, you would have no idea, and it still contains the exact same spirit that we had in the room. But you do have those kind of cushions around you to help you. And then also, it's like, we're just trying to have some fun too. So it's okay. Like, you actually can, like, and people know that when they're listening, if they wanted to hear a perfect record, they would put on a studio record.
Right.
Like, studio record, people are going to have sung that thing 100 times, you know? And so that helps a little bit, but it's still really nerve wracking. Like, none of that makes it easier. None of that makes it like less stressful when they're about to press record, you know? And especially for the kind of way we do it, where people like swapping in and out, and it's like every song there's a different person that's hopping in the middle of the circle. And you're like, all right. And you're like, so you're standing there in worship, and then 2 minutes later, you're sitting there like shoving your in-ears in, you're grabbing somebody's monitor, like in-ear monitors that they've already, like, it's based on their mix. And you're like, all right, I guess I'm sitting down and playing this thing. And so there are parts of it that are always going to be really crazy. Because even with that, like, when you're swapping in and out, the flow of the night isn't stopping. It's like during the song, after the song, is when people are now starting to swap in. And that's a really crazy experience. It's like musical chairs. So yeah, it is super nerve-wracking, but I think that things that are helpful is we're having fun. We're with people that we know, and we all love each other, and are ultimately just gassing each other up. Like, the whole time, we're like, that was amazing. There's like I mean, worship is already such an amazing environment to be in. Like, people are excited to be there. They're engaging with God. They're engaging with each other. And then there's also, of course, if the songs are good, you're excited to sing them. And there's like, and we love each other's songs, and we love the way each other leads, and we love to be led by each other also. And so that, I think that helps kind of channel the nerves into excitement, instead of just like, holy crap, I'm going to pee my pants. You know? But it does feel that way at times.
No, I think it's really cool what you're saying there. Like, from the, even just from the standpoint of, you know, you're talking about like gassing each other up. Like, it is so different, you know, leading as a team and as people who are rooting for one another, rather than, you know, so often musician, and it doesn't matter whether it's worship or rock or whatever, like the amount of green rooms that I've been in my life where it's like the whole time everyone's puffing up to try and like puff up their ego so that they don't feel insecure. And so like, can you talk a little bit about, I want to be sensitive of your time here too.
But you're good.
Can you talk a little bit about of how you build that kind of relationship to where rather than feeling insecure and you know, holding your ego, how do you work in this kind of more selfless, like, I am so excited for you to be leading me?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, as creative people, we're like notoriously insecure. That's just life. And anyone who, like, we all know, if anyone says that they're not, they're probably lying about it. Like, that was such a relief for me to realize that people who I would assume would come in with no insecurity were still, like, you know, had imposter syndrome, were nervous, were like having to, you know, even battle thoughts of comparison and do I deserve to be here and all these things. Like that's just a thing that everyone deals with. I've yet to meet a person who doesn't feel that. And so part of it is out of necessity. You're like, I've just learned that in my own life, if I will support someone else, it helps me lose sight of that insecurity that I feel, right? It's like someone must have taught me that along the way, but it's this thing that if I find myself like buckling under imposter syndrome, comparison, insecurity, then wherever that's being channeled, let me just like actually support these people because for some reason it really cures it. It actually like solves the problem. And so I've seen that modeled for me. A lot of people have shown me that where they're just always like, they're the biggest fans of everyone in the room. That is super helpful, I think, for their own hearts. And it's helpful for just the team dynamics that are happening. If you want to do something collaborative, your ego is going to be the thing that's going to hurt you the most. And again, we would all like to pretend that in worship, these things don't happen, but like, of course it happens. And so I think that it's really important to support one another also because if I'm like I'll just take, for example, there's a song on the record called If I Could Have Anything that I'm singing with this song with this girl, Aja Walls, who has one of the craziest voices I've ever heard in my entire life. She sounds like Brandy. It's insane. She's so good. She's like wild. And in order to collaborate well in that moment, I need to like be responsive to what she's doing. You know what I'm saying? And so we're like in the recording of that song, looking at each other back and forth and like passing the baton back and forth and saying, no, this is you, this is you, this is you, this is you, and letting you just go for it. And beautiful things come out of that. And I've seen groups like Housefires, Maverick City, Bethel Music, tons of other art that have done this so well, where like co-leading and leading in community and leading together is such a value, and something feels distinct about it, because it's probably more representative of what real worship is, and not in the sense of like the sound or anything, but that it's people coming together. So I think it captures that in a way that like is really wonderful. And there has to be a level of humility to it, because collaboration literally requires humility. If not, it's just a weird competition. And you can feel that in moments where you like, like there were so many times when I was like, 18, 19 years old, starting to really lead worship for the first time. And I felt that like comparison competition thing. And I would hate leading worship. It sucked because all I was thinking about was who sang this and who sang that. And, when was the biggest part of the set? And it was like so weird for my brain. And then I would walk away and be like, I didn't even worship God the whole time. I led worship somehow, but I didn't feel connected to it. And I feel that collaboration is a really interesting, beautiful avenue for worship, because you come in humble automatically, just because you're paying attention to what God is doing in someone else as well as yourself. So I think it's a both and. Obviously, like there are people on this record and that are doing things with us who are like otherworldly talented, and so there's a little bit of balance you have to have with that as well, where you can come in and remember like, oh, there's actually I have to show up in this moment as well, right? I can't just defer. I actually have to show up, and remember that like our gifts are given to be shared, and so I think that those two sides of that coin feel really feel important to me, and feel like they kind of create the beauty of what we see in collaboration. So
that's awesome, man. Well, it's like so much. This is so packed. I'm like, when I go through these interviews, I'm like thinking about like, okay, like what is going to be our take on it, whatever. And I'm just gonna like the whole thing. It's It's like, well, because it's like there are all these things that are really common
Yeah.
as musicians, that, like you said, like we feel like, oh, it shouldn't happen for worship, or it shouldn't be this way. And it's like, no, like there's the way we can all say it shouldn't be something, but it is something, right? And so learning how to let that, like recognize that, and then look for God to change that, and look for ways in which that we can be different, rather than just like pretend like things aren't the way they are, right? Like,
and especially
like,
for
doesn't get
people
us
in
anywhere.
and especially in local church, these things, these are just as real on a Sunday morning as they are on like some recording that's going to go around the world. We face all the same things, and it's should be refreshing and comforting for people to know that. I feel refreshed on Sunday mornings knowing what I've experienced in these contexts, and then vice versa as well. It's like these are common things that we all have to figure out together, and when we do that, we experience really, really beautiful moments with God and with each other. And I think that is what like this record and what Housefires has done, and people like Housefires, like Upper Room and United Pursuit, and like these people who have like really, really gone after worship and community. That this is the thing that we that I think the world is being shown through these groups, and we consider ourselves lucky to be a part of that. And I mean, I consider myself lucky to now be a part of something that kind of taught me in a lot of ways how to lead with people and how to lead in community. So,
I really took his advice on when I went to Anchor Hymns, because when he talks about kind of like, hey, like I just want to be the biggest fan of everyone in the room.
Yeah.
And I was so nervous about going to this. I'm like, I'm going to go write with all these amazing songwriters, and I'm just Jason,
Yeah.
And instead of being like insecure and like, oh, I need to show that I can do, like, I was just like, I'm just so happy to be here. Like, I'm a huge fan.
That changes everything.
It changes everything.
Yeah. Because if you step in with insecurity, that's false humility. Like you're just scared.
Right.
And you're trying to show as if you're not scared. So you're not actually being humble. It's false humility. Like,
well, and we have this natural, I think, musicians have that because it's so part of our identity. It's something that it's not just something we do, it's something that we are. Mm-hmm. We often have a lot of insecurity around it. And that's not healthy, but it's true.
Yeah. It's something you have to deal with for sure.
Right. You're always going to have to work against that. And, maybe someday it'll just be totally gone. Yeah. But like sometimes it sneaks up and surprises me. Like I'm like, why do I care about this?
I thought I dealt with this.
Yeah. Why do I care? But the cool thing is you recognize it and you go, oh, I'm caring about this. Something is wrong.
Yep.
And then you can kind of dig into that. And so I just thought he had such great answers around that. And it was really helpful.
That's amazing. Well, if you need help learning some worship songs, be sure to head to worshipartistry.com. We have over 600 worship songs on there that you can choose from, where your team can just come, learn, have the lessons, the direction, the chord charts, the lyrics, the
confidence.
The confidence.
You lose the ego, and you just know you can play it. And there's no question.
Yes.
And that feels really, really good to everybody on your team.
Yes. So be sure to go there, start a free trial if you haven't already, and we'll see you next time.